How are you doing?
All right.
All
How are
right.
you?
I'm okay. Okay. In Berlin, it's getting a lot um, easier here. I mean, people are really loosening up a lot. Everything with the stores are opening and the restaurants are opening. Bars and clubs aren't opened yet, but when you're walking outside, you don't really have the feeling at the moment that there may be a pandemic still on the loose. How's it in New York?
Yeah, I've been going back and forth between my home in Brooklyn and my weekend house in the Catskills, where I'm right now. So I'm a little bit disconnected from New York today, but New York City is officially starting phase one of reopening today, which means that in addition to essential stores for groceries, etc., stores are slowly opening, which means mostly curbside service. So you order and they bring things out for you. And yeah, people are using the subways again to go back to work. I've heard some reports that they look amazingly clean, but it's basically just testing the water. So apparently it still feels very much like sheltering.
Are there still people dying of the pandemic, or have they
Uh,
also?
y- yes.
Yeah,
I think it was 46 in the whole state yesterday, which is a very low number. And we actually recently had a day where the first day where nobody died in New York City, which
that's
hasn't
great.
happened in
Yeah.
months. Yeah.
Here it's very confusing in a way because we had these huge demonstrations. One, we had a demonstration, I think last week for club culture, and there were all these people in boats, like those kind of boats that you can blow up, plastic
Yeah.
boats, and they were demonstrating for club culture, and everybody was really kind of shocked because they were also demonstrating underneath a hospital where people were actually dying of the virus, and they were demonstrating for club culture in front of the hospital. So everybody was like, that's terrible. And then this week, there was a huge demonstration because of Black Lives Matter. There were 15,000 people standing side on side on Alexanderplatz. And so everybody's like, so what is the situation? I think that nobody really knows, and that we're all kind of waiting to see if the number of infected is going to go up or if it's going to just stay the way it is. And we're not hearing very much about what to do from the government because I think everybody's just pretty confused. It's a very strange
Yeah.
time.
It is, by all means. And of course, the situation in New York is similar and amplified. There are still massive protests every day, and it's hard to keep social distance, and nobody knows what the impact will be when it comes to the virus. I think we're still far away from herd immunity,
Yeah.
which we're looking for. But yeah, it's
I, I never like that word herd. I didn't never.
yeah, me neither, but that's what they call it.
Yeah, no, I'm not a herd.
Yeah.
How does it impact your work actually? Has like the whole time now? How
Yeah.
has it changed?
Yeah, it's been really amazing, I must say, because my field is digital art and digital technology, both as a curator and as a professor at the New School in New York. So media and the internet has been what I've been involved with for decades.
Yeah.
And then you live in this unprecedented moment where the world goes virtual, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that will happen again on this massive scale. So suddenly we saw everything that we had talked about since the early 90s when it came to connectedness and virtuality and online environments play out on a global scale with all its greatness and pitfalls. Work went online, obviously, and the art world naturally has been very heavily hit since all of the museums and institutions closed, and artists and cultural workers are the ones who really need support. So they have, of course, been heavily hit by all of this, and museums and institutions have been trying to support them as much as possible through online programming, bringing exhibitions online. So the Whitney Museum, where I work, has been closed now for a few months, but we also decided to go ahead with some crucial meetings, such as our acquisition committees, so that we could support artists and galleries and still bring works into the collection and buy them. But we had to change all the protocols for doing that. I have been specializing early on in internet art, and net art since the 90s, since it came about, has been going through these waves of interest. You know, so there were times when there was an incredible hype, and then there was the bubble, the whole startup bubble that burst basically in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it took a hit again. And now there has been this enormous interest in it, since it's the only art form that you can experience right now in its native environment, and that is meant to be seen online rather than art that is just represented through video or images online. So the attention that my curatorial work has been getting in that area has been absolutely exhausting. It's like increase every day, a lot of attention from the press and interviews nonstop. So net art has its moment again, I guess. One silver lining in this pandemic.
I can imagine. I was wondering, I know that a lot of artists are really, really interested in being able to expose their work and work together with people, but do you have any possibility of finding out if the audience is actually really interested in that as well? Like, has the awareness of the audience changed? Because obviously everybody wants to show what they're doing, but is the audience just as large as the ones that are showing it?
Yes, I mean, I don't have numbers of different institutions to compare, but at the Whitney, we have had massive audiences for screenings. I think there was one screening with 14,000 people logging in. And for example, I have felt that my audience for internet art is still fairly niche. I mean, there is a large audience that pays attention to this, but the traditional viewer who comes to see paintings typically is not the person who visits the Artport website, which I'm curating for the Whitney. And I think that has changed. Suddenly, that type of work is more on the radar of people. So I think one of the positive effects is that people who were interested mostly in more traditional physical art forms and media have become a lot more aware of what is going on, and also of learning what it means to have online presence in these constant Zoom meetings or an online audience. So I think there has been a shift. My big question is, will that shift still be there once we return to physical space?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's been really kind of mind-blowing, the whole thing. I'm not an internet artist. I'm not a new media artist. I'm a pretty, I paint and I do my films and stuff and music. But there's a couple of things that I realized during the last 3 months that I thought was really interesting. And for one was, I had the feeling that we've all been treating the internet per se more as a TV than actually what it's capable of, especially in the area of interactivity. And I was thinking, we've actually never really thought about that. Usually we look at a video or we're doing something in front of somebody, but actually having that interactivity is something that, for me at least, is something which I find very, very interesting. And I was wondering, are there actually artists that have been doing that already? Basically doing interactive projects within internet. So if you can like Google them, it's like not an installation, but in, something that you can actually Google.
Yeah, very interestingly, this type of work was much, much more prominent in the 90s. This was the beginnings of net art, where you had artists such as Andy Deck or Mark Napier, for example, doing works where you really collaboratively would work together. So they would create frameworks for an audience. So Andy, for example, did a piece called Open Studio and a piece called Eye Context, where people from around the world could basically visit the site and the project and then draw icons together live, within the same space, or do paintings together. Mark Napier did a work called Pea Soup, where you could, from a menu, select graphic forms and sounds and basically trigger them, very much like ripples on a lake. And I distinctly remember once sitting there in the 90s one night, and I was clicking away, creating these scenes, and there was somebody else with me, or maybe more than one person. And I was getting tired, but I felt like, what if this is a little kid who is really excited right now to do this with me? And I just couldn't leave,
Yeah,
and it was just a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
And then what came with social media and YouTube was a return to broadcast yourself, which of course is the slogan of it.
Interesting.
And suddenly we returned to much more of a TV culture. And you actually more recently have seen less of this really interactive work. But I think what the current Zoom meetings, etc., have really highlighted and brought to the forefront is that is the potential, and that is what we all want. So I hope there also will be a return to that and a move away from broadcast yourself and a process of rediscovering, which I think would be great. So this has been explored by artists for quite some time. But
that's fascinating. Yeah. Because I mean, like I said, I don't know very much about it, and I didn't know that. And for me, just because of this virus or pandemic, I suddenly started thinking about it, because I saw two things which I thought was really interesting. One was a cooking show where one person does a recipe and everybody can cook together with him, and then they kind of tell each other online what's going wrong or what's working out. And so I thought that's really interesting. And then I had another example of another artist, Jim Avignon, who was doing a show where he was painting, and people could guess what the painting was, and they would write a name, and then he would say, oh, that's the right name. So it was really like an interactive audience artist thing. So there are a couple of possibilities. It's like the possibilities of artists collaborating together, or the artists and the audience collaborating together, which I think is a completely fantastic new form of entertainment. Because I thought, like, oh my God, that is so much more entertaining, like going away from just the art, but going to entertainment, like, instead of looking at a movie, you actually can have an entertaining, interactive experience with maybe even somebody that you really admire. So, it's just a completely new form of interacting, which I hope is going to develop through the situation, because it really fascinates me.
Yeah, and that to me was also a great experience, to see people getting creative and really, expressing that wish for this kind of connection in spaces. So we became also so aware of the limitations of software such as Zoom, where both of us are now represented in our little boxes next to each other in different environments. And I don't know if you've been to kind of Zoom parties or meetings where people try to establish connections by passing around objects.
No.
Somebody picking up a lemon, for example. A lemon is something that most people have in their house. And then you reach over, from one screen to the next, and the lemon keeps appearing. Actually, it's a series on Apple TV, Mythic Quest, which, in full disclosure, I haven't watched it. It's a sitcom basically about a gaming company, so something like The Office, but within a gaming community. And what I have watched is a special they did basically on Zoom, or playing with all of the pitfalls of it. And what the whole team does in the end at a Zoom meeting is basically recreate or riff of the famous Fischli and Weiss installations, the ones that, through this kind of domino effect, set things in motion.
Right.
And they threw out the Zoom windows an incredibly complex installation,
Wow.
that you see things moving and rolling through all of the windows. And that was kind of a perfect expression of that, trying to really harness that potential. I hope that will continue, once the pandemic is over. And we also need more creative use of those technologies. Claudia Hart is an artist, for example, who has played a lot with Zoom and the green screen and backgrounds of it.
Yes.
Really creatively.
I saw that.
Yeah, she did a series called On Zoomology, which actually ended up getting so much attention that the CEO of Zoom asked to talk to her.
Wow. Yeah, I thought that was really inspiring. It's actually inspired me to think of doing something similar too, because I actually think, for me, it's opened a huge door just in my area also, because, I was thinking, if you think about it, being able to do these things online opens a huge audience for somebody, where usually, like for me, for instance, if I'm touring as a musician, only the people that are in that continent or the city or wherever can see me actually performing. And suddenly the thought that you can do interesting things online where you're actually performing or doing your art, you can actually do something which your audience from, like say 300 in a club, all of a sudden is like 5,000 people watching you all over the world, because I do have people that know me all over the place, and very often they're sad that I can't come and perform there. And to be able to do that in an interesting way, not just like, sitting there and performing in front of Zoom, but actually turning it into complete show, kind of like in the 70s TV, like those, kind of weird shows where you're also moderating it and stuff. But on top of it, having that interaction is like something that is so fantastic that I really, I don't care if the pandemic stops and everything goes back to normal. I'm certainly not going to go back to normal, because I think it's this new world all of a sudden, which really has been inspiring me so much, more than anything for years, actually. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and that's the hope that many people have, that we have gained momentum with this type of potential when it comes to art and music and any forms of cultural expression, hoping that this will continue. One very practical obstacle I see here is funds and money and resources to do that. I've thought about that a lot, because right now museums focus all of their efforts on the digital. But the digital media teams working at those institutions, they typically would work on bringing images and videos of the latest show online, etc. And now they can actually focus on a completely different kind of programming.
Right.
Once we're going, quote unquote, back to normal, you would need to increase the staff and the funding in order to continue on both levels. And the resources aren't necessarily there, but hopefully people will be creative enough, particularly in smaller organizations, to continue reaching this larger online
Yeah.
audience?
I mean, we were looking around because we were thinking, we did a couple of online concerts, Alexander and I did, and I did one alone myself too. We just did it with the iPhone and a handy stick, because the iPhone's
Yeah.
quality is good. And so we're like, if we continue doing this, we want to have better things to work with. And we were checking online, and there were like these tiny cameras on sale now, because everybody's buying them for 19 euros. That usually costs like 200. And you can get them, and they have a widescreen lens for, I think, almost 170 degrees angle. So, if you get 3 of those and build yourself a little blue box, it's actually, you can get something with really decent quality, because everything is such decent quality, and it doesn't cost anything. The only thing is, of course, for an artist as me, is if we do this instead of concerts, because all of our shows have been canceled till next May 2021, how are we going to earn money? So at the moment, we're kind of saying, we've come up with this idea of doing one song per week that we perform as if we were on stage, and we do a little video of it, and then we put it online, and then we ask people to buy an album on Bandcamp if they like it. But that's, of course, not really the answer. So the financial part is definitely the question in all of these things, I think, because I mean, if we do performances for Goethe Institute or for institutions, then we get a little bit of money. But I mean, there's millions of artists that have to be taken care of. So how does one earn money in between? That's the big question.
But people also seem to be willing to make micropayments or donations for these types of online concerts, which I think is another way to go, because they really appreciate the effort that goes into doing that. And I've also watched a lot of movie theaters which have been following that model. They're still selling tickets,
Oh, really?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually selling tickets to movies, also newly released films.
Yeah.
So you basically following the model of a movie you would buy on Amazon or whatever. You just buy a ticket for a screening time, and I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, another thing that I thought was really spectacular was this awareness that suddenly came up. I mean, it's kind of been the first time in my life, I think, that the awareness was the way I had always dreamed of, that people actually would call you or write to you and say, are you okay? And what are you up to? And, I've always wanted to buy something of you. Can I buy it now? That this awareness was suddenly there, which usually in normal life, people are just too busy and they don't have time to think of anything except surviving, basically. So for me, that was kind of mind-blowing. And that's the area where I wonder if that's going to stay that way when it's over, because it was so nice.
Yeah. I mean, what it also tells us is that we just need more time for contemplation, or days where we really retreat from just the daily hustle and leave that time for creating that awareness. Oh, maybe I'm checking in with so-and-so, because you get so caught up in the physical world with all of its distractions that actually sheltering at home for a while creates a different kind of awareness. But there are already efforts underway of doing that, and campaigns which started before the pandemic. People basically saying, disconnect from the usual distractions and return to physical space and think about the things you usually would neglect.
Yeah. I heard something very interesting yesterday from a friend of mine who has a store, and she said that a lot of people who were working for her, who couldn't come into work anymore, they suddenly decided that they want to change the direction of their lives, and that this whole break has actually made people think about that they would actually prefer working from home, for instance. And I have to say that I usually always do the booking for my shows and for my tours, and I do the management, and I do like 6 jobs at once. And because all of this wasn't possible, I basically could just concentrate on art. And I felt as relaxed as I haven't felt for years. And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I kind of don't even want to go back. I mean, I love touring and I love performing on stage, but this is so much more relaxing that it's almost difficult to think of going back and racing around and going places instead of just zooming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a massive reevaluation, and that's another point I wanted to bring up, because art and technology have also explored that. That is the whole labor and economy. I mean, so many businesses are now reevaluating who can work from home. You know, Facebook most prominently has been discussing that, which may be a good thing, but there are also worries that it really will impact the infrastructure of cities. Yeah, that people
Interesting.
will actually not seek jobs there, that it might change the fabric of some cities if people work online only. Worst case scenario is that, you know, we all move to this kind of call center scenario where
Yes.
talking to somebody I don't know where in the world. I actually had a really funny moment during the pandemic when I had internet problems and suspected there was something wrong with the router. And I talked to someone over the phone who said to me, just go to the store and buy a new one. And I was speechless and was like, where are you? I'm in New York City. You know, there is no store where I can just buy one, you know. And it took the woman on the other end a moment to realize what she had been saying, you know. So having this physical disconnect with remote work, of course, also has its downsides. But that's also something that we will see. And as you say, there can be really positive effects to that. And on the other hand, we might move even more into this kind of gig economy, working from home scenario, which also
Complete isolation.
aspects.
Yeah, and complete anonymity. Yeah, it's really interesting because when I and Alexander became nomads 2010, we thought, well, you know, it doesn't really matter where you live nowadays. We can work from anywhere from our computers because we can. I mean, we did film music for companies that were in Europe and we were in the States. But it was really interesting because you could tell that it didn't work because people do actually, or did back then, want to know that you were around so they could just, you know, they knew, okay, he's there, and if I need something, I can just meet him quickly and stuff like that. So it wasn't as easy as we actually thought it would be. And we kind of, you could tell that people still had that attitude, well, he's not here at the moment, so he's not in my life, or she's not here.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, that was kind of odd and disappointing because technically it's definitely possible. You can do almost anything nowadays, anywhere, and you don't have to be close to anybody, as we've noticed. On the other hand, it was kind of nice too because you could tell that somehow each community takes care of its own. You know, like it's kind of like Berlin takes care of the Berliners, the Berlin culture does, and New York culture takes care of them. So in that way, there's always a little bit of the feeling that you're safe in a way. And like you said, if this anonymity would grow so much that one could actually really do everything online, the sense of responsibility for people might lessen because that whole feeling also does lessen if you don't have a personal contact.
Yeah, and you sometimes just need in-person meetings to be creative and have ideas. I mean, the results of a meeting or just creative brainstorming session that takes place online or in a room is, I think, radically different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for instance, Alexander, my husband, had great problems at the beginning Zooming with people because he said, I can only see their head. I don't know what they're doing with their hands. I don't know, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
And there's people who very much need that, also the aura or the, just that whole, I don't know how to call it, what you have when you're actually seeing somebody live in comparison to if you're on a screen. And that does make a difference, which is, I think, a very interesting psychological thing about this whole
yeah.
thing too.
But I think we haven't been very smart about making differences here. I think many meetings that do not need to take place in person or do not require people flying around the world, have done that. And there are others where that physical presence is absolutely crucial. So I think one of the positive effects of the pandemic also could be a re-evaluation of
Yeah,
when we need physical presence and when we can do something very effectively online.
exactly. I mean, that's another theme also I was reading about yesterday, that robots are like on the rise now. Because
Yeah,
have you heard anything about that, or do you?
they have. I mean, that has also been ongoing, and I think once again the pandemic has amplified it. Yeah, robots in combination with AI are used increasingly also for agriculture, for example, in all different kinds of areas. And once again, we need really radical evaluations of what the effects of that are for labor. And particularly in media arts, there's, and has been for quite some time, a really massive area where artists and activists are engaging with those themes
Robots?
and
Yes.
exploring, the effects of robotics. I actually had curated an exhibition called The Question of Intelligence, about artificial intelligence at the New Schools Galleries, which then was closed prematurely due to the pandemic and got trapped within the galleries. And one of the pieces was a robotic piece that was a robot tending to a garden
Ah,
in the greenhouse of the University of California at Berkeley. So that robot was driven by AI and was basically tending with a robotic arm that was watering and weeding, etc., and was learning from algorithms and also from humans. In
wow.
making its decisions, which is very unusual. Typically, the AI would only learn from
Algorithms, yeah.
algorithmic engagement. Yeah, and then the team lost access to the greenhouse and the garden went completely berserk and the robot couldn't manage it anymore.
Oh,
You
really?
can still Google it at Alpha Garden and view the simulations. It became really beautiful, but totally out of control. Like
Wow, yeah,
because the
well,
AI couldn't manage it anymore by itself.
by
So there were
itself.
hours, and it's fascinating to watch it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. In the article, they were saying that probably the robotic machines would help people not have to do such heavy labor, for instance. And then this question, of course, is if they would all lose their jobs. And they were saying that the companies are then trying to get them into like personnel or to organizational things, so that it's actually, in that way, helping you humans not to have to labor so hard and still keep their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, there's great potential in it. Once again, like letting the machines do the type of work that humans ideally wouldn't be going. The problem really is that corporations and industries are not thinking enough about the workers who get displaced and about reskilling and the jobs that they could move into.
Yeah,
That is
yeah,
creating the problem.
yeah. Well, yeah, like I said, they might be doing that in person or just inventing new jobs. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's a very exciting time. I mean, it's of course there's a lot, super many difficulties and all that, but in a way, it's somehow opened so many psychological and art and communication ways. I think it's. Do you think it's going to change when you go back to the museum or the new school in how seriously they take your area, or do you think it's gonna like what have they or have they spoken to you about planning new things of how to make it more, I don't know, an art exhibition about what people did during the pandemic in that area or things like that?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. So right now there are really high demands on me, just continuing to develop online initiatives. Everybody agrees that this is a really great moment for radical reevaluation and testing the potential, but I'm not sure how much really deep systemic change there will be.
Huh?
I hope there will be, and I hope that we're moving along with all of the potential. There are definitely exhibitions in the works reflecting on this. It's always it's really difficult to create good work in response to it. As they say, typically disasters bring about a lot of bad art,
Oh, do they?
Yeah. Because in the moment it's so hard to have the distance to engage with it as an artist, so you also need
Right.
time to process. I'm not saying that there aren't great art pieces who are created right in the moment of crisis, but it often takes a while to
Yeah,
listen, to evaluate.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I've already read people saying, I don't want to read all those books that are coming out as diaries and stuff like that, like the all. But I mean, for instance, Alexander and I are going to be not performing or live until next May. So we have to continue brainstorming how on earth we're going to earn money.
Yeah.
And so basically for me, if it stops or doesn't stop, and I guess for all musicians and for all performing artists, it's the situation that's going to go on for at least a year, which is kind of interesting because, in comparison to everybody else that can kind of go back to school, we have to seriously think about what to do because booking a tour takes half a year. And I can't book a tour now for next spring because I don't know if the second wave is going to come. So I kind of have to wait until next spring around March, April to see if I can book something for next fall. And so what do we do until then?
Yeah.
Which kind of is like an ongoing process of, okay, so we have to find a new way of how to be able to do something that carries within it repetition so that people repeatedly want to see what we do, just like as if we were on tour, and that actually generates consciousness, awareness, and support, which is a complete, normally if I would suddenly be put in a situation of like, well, all your jobs are gone for a year, I think I just have a complete freak out and jump out of a window.
Yeah.
But because we were all in such a state of shock, we had a different way of going about it, and we're kind of calmly trying to solve that. But it's really it's like an on progress.
Oh yes, absolutely. We're in this for a long haul, and I didn't mean to say that there would be a quick return to normal, particularly not in New York City. I mean, it's very clear that cultural institutions will not fully reopen until sometime next year. Even if museums, etc., start to open, it will be with limited access. There obviously won't be any tours, or all of the activities that usually take place won't happen this year.
Will you be able to fly artists in? Not necessarily, right?
No, but just because I think you may be able to do that, but what risk are you taking?
Right, right.
For them to fly, and is that really necessary and worth it? So finding strategies of supporting artists in different ways, that will be an ongoing thing for the next year.
Yeah. But I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting. It's really so mind-opening. I'll be sure to ask you for more advice on different methods of how people have interacted since the 70s in art. They're kind of like really interesting for everyday life now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and have a great time in the countryside.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, and speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.